Hello, everybody. This is Waldorf.
And Statler.
And now we're going to take a look at the Ninth Scroll. Look at that.
Issue number 15. Gosh, there's been 15 of them?
There's been 15 of these. They've done a really good job with these.
Yeah.
If you haven't paid attention to these, you really should. They're really nice. Usually have some nice things in them and nice pictures of armies.
But you're better off downloading to your computer first.
Definitely download them to your computer.
Because they're much slower when you try to access them directly
They
from
are.
the site. Yeah.
They are. So this Ninth Scroll, issue 15, that just came out in the beginning of May. Why is that not going away?
Yes.
There we go.
It has an article that we thought was particularly germane to our channel.
Correct. And it was How to Speed Up Play.
Yes.
And this was Isaac Bobo Alexander, who I don't know. But anyway.
Hey, boo-boo.
Yeah, Boo Boo. That's Boo Boo.
It all depends on your accent.
Anyway, that's a good point. Anyway.
So anyway, we like this article, so we thought it was a good thing to point out since a lot of the gameplay is. So we're going to steal it and add our own little comments to it.
It also is particularly applicable to the North American tournaments.
Yes.
Because we've been having trouble in North American tournaments getting things done. And in the old 2.5 hours. We used to take pride in the fact that we can hammer out a game in 2.5 hours, no problem. But now it went to 2:45, and now we've stretched them. Almost all the tournaments are stretching them up to 3 hours now.
Right.
So he kind of goes over the numbers real quick, and he's like, the ones he plays in, he typically has 2 hours and 45 minutes, and he says, 45 minutes pregame and deployment. And that's about right.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a big chunk of time.
Yep.
But there's a bunch of time built into that. Mm-hmm. And of course, it says that leaves you 120 minutes to play, 12 turns. That's only 12 minutes a turn.
Yep.
Which is not a long time.
It's very little time. Now, some turns go quicker than others, but...
Correct. And he brings that up around turn 3, 4, 5. Stuff gets engaged. Combat starts becoming more...
When you start using all the facets of the system, then it can be tough.
Yep. So, anyway... So his tips, we're not going to do them in order because that requires a little too much scrolling.
Yeah, so we'll hit them as we hit them.
And I'm lazy and I don't like scrolling.
There you go.
But his tip number 2 was talk to your opponent. You can save a lot of time and hassle discussing what constitutes cock dice for you, if you're going to use intent or not.
Right.
And, of course, the measuring thing. Do you measure from bases or trays? And then showing wounds. I always show wounds taken, but I've got another clubmate who has always shown wounds remaining.
Right.
It's not a problem as long as you know what's going on.
As long as you understand.
Yeah. So,
it also depends on how you're representing the wounds, because a lot of people use dice.
Correct.
So
most people use dice.
That's where this gets confusing. If you tend to use counters,
that's true. I use the little blood mark counters
to reference it. So it's
a lot of times I will use dice temporarily and then dig out the counters.
Right.
That's another thing is I like when I see my opponent doing is, okay, I raise skeletons, I got 10 in this unit, 10 in this unit, and they'll set out dice behind them and says, I'll put them out there when, it's your turn.
When you're moving, exactly.
And it's like, oh, great, fantastic.
I think some of these items these etiquette items are also important just to, if you have game, what do you call it? Friendliness of play, being a good opponent. What's it?
Sportsmanship.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Sportsmanship. These things are also important, especially with cock dice. Is if your opponent thinks you only call cock dice when it's at your disadvantage, you're going to get a bad sportsmanship score.
Exactly.
So it's really important.
I actually got yelled at. Not yelled at, but I got reprimanded in one game because I was picking. If die was partially cocked and it was a good number for me, I would pick it up and re-roll it. But the same die partially cocked was a bad number for me, I would leave it. And my opponent said, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
Anyway, it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I tend to just say it'll where I pick a flat surface, whatever that is, and if it lands on any terrain, I don't care if it's flat or not, it doesn't count.
Now the guys, I've been playing a few games with the ETC players, and their straight up rule is if it's not flat on the table, it does not count. That means even if it's sitting on a playing card, so it's perfectly flat, it's not on the table, it doesn't count. And they stick to it and they re-roll those no matter good or bad or whatever. And whatever that rule is, as long as you are clear with your opponent up front. fine.
And intent is it's good for sportsmanship. Sometimes though, if you play against a very competitive opponent, they won't care what your intent is. But sometimes it can help because you think you're doing something and your opponent doesn't see it that way. You can fix it at that point so it doesn't become a challenge later on. When they say, oh no, I thought you were, no, you're half an inch farther away or whatever's going on.
Right. Yeah, and that's the intent thing as well. I've seen that a lot, and I do like it. It does speed up the game. You look, you say, okay, you can obviously get out of my arc, so you don't have to spend 10 minutes measuring. Let's just keep it going.
Right.
You know?
That's it. And if
it's obvious to your opponent, and he agrees.
And then sometimes, and it's not enough. And oh, now you need to back up a little bit more. Okay. It doesn't become a discussion topic later on. And,
when the game's on the line.
Right, when the game's on the line.
Yes. Again, he talks about that in here. Take a chance out to read the whole thing.
Right.
But that's it. To the left, we have tip 1, which was know your rules. This is very important, but I agree. This is extremely important.
Yes.
It is also. I'm of the mind now that not only do you need to know your rules. When I run my next tournament in October, I'm really considering requiring people to bring their Army book printed. A printed copy of their Army book.
But I think that falls into the get organized.
Oh, is it? Okay. Anyway, because...
Well, there's 2 levels of knowing rules, right? There's knowing the rules.
The rules to the game.
Now, if you do something wrong with the rules, your opponent will probably say something to you. You might get embarrassed or annoyed, but that can come up. But there's knowing your army. That's
yes.
And the spells that you're using.
Yeah.
If you're using Paths of Magic. So yes, and to your point.
Right.
Yeah, we had our most recent Warbands book is, the 2 players, they didn't have their books with them, so they were trying to do stuff from memory.
Oh, or their phones,
or their phones or whatever, and trying to find the page and everything. It just became, forget. We'll just do this.
Agreed. Tip 3 was get organized. Movement trays. I've actually not. It's very, very rare that I see somebody without movement trays for every unit.
Yes.
I've seen a couple occasions where a guy has 1 or 2 units without movement trays.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a point I don't see a problem with. But yeah,
but it's a valid point.
It is, definitely is.
If you're going to you're going to the tournament for the first time, you haven't gone to tournaments. Part of the challenge with knowing the rules is it's playing a lot, and so maybe when you first start, you're not as good at the rules as you should be, or as you'd like to be. I shouldn't say should be, and then that's why it's important to have the game aids, have your rules with you.
Right.
Maybe even just do just the sections, do unit cards or whatever stuff that helps you remember. Also, sometimes your opponent doesn't necessarily know your army, or you may have a disagreement on what something does.
Right.
And you can quickly say, no, I do have a regen save of 5.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And to me, I think, though, that requires an army book rather than a card.
Yeah.
Because the opponent,
Sure. Yeah.
There's always that time where you've got that was a card from last edition.
Yeah.
And again, they're talking about the supplies to bring.
Right.
Which, all very good, all very good points. Tape measure, couple different colored die, wound markers, whatever you want to call for wound markers.
Arcs, 1-inch marker.
Arcs are important. 1-inch markers nice to have, and I think spell cards and flux cards should be required. Spell cards should be required.
Well, to me, they're required. Yes.
Or, if not spell cards, at least markers for the spells that have gone off.
Yes.
So it stops being that that was on this unit, this was on that unit.
Right.
He talks a couple things through here. Having to go into a phone or laptop to view spells every magic phase is a huge waste of time.
Yep.
It is. I 100% agree with this. And I've seen this a ton. Anyway.
And sometimes, you don't even have it. You see people don't have it on their computer. They're trying to access the site.
Right.
They don't have Wi-Fi or, stuff happens. You can't count on Wi-Fi wherever you're playing.
Yeah. He's talking about having, and this is one I'm not a huge fan of, but helps him apparently. And that's knowing how many dice you have, so you can say, okay, well, I'll just set these 2 aside and roll these.
Mm-hmm.
Too easy for dice to be missing or whatever. And
right.
happened to be misplaced or during the
Yeah.
game or whatever. But I understand his point.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping your table tidy. Unfortunately, in tournaments, this is tough. Leave it in the most remote corner possible. Perfect. I mean, you kind of have to, but a lot of tournaments don't have the room to get your stuff
Right.
off the table.
Quite often it's map to map. There's no,
Right.
and I wish more tournaments would. I mean, they're trying to fit more mats in, and the way
Right.
a lot of stores are done or whatever. They would just leave some space so you could put your stuff on the side.
Correct. I love the tournaments
It also
I go
looks
to.
better,
Yes. I love the tournaments I go to where there's at least a foot between each table,
Right.
which is not a lot, but it's at least enough to set your books, your pencils, your paper, your dice,
And hopefully your
there's
casualties.
some casualties up
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So fantastic if you can get it. But,
And if you can't, so it's really about your casualties. Is just get it out of where you're playing.
right.
There's usually most of the time there's a spot on the board that's not being used so much.
Correct. Sometimes that turns out to be
Sometimes all of a sudden have your shifts over there.
you
but,
have to start moving stuff, but
Yeah.
he's correct. Plan your first turn. Sorry. What are we doing? Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Plan your first turn during your deployment. Yeah, I've seen so many people deploy and then try to figure out what they're going to do.
Yes.
Especially, you've seen the stuff down there. You're putting it down there. This kind of goes to a tip to playing is you should know what your goal is when you put a unit in a spot.
Correct.
And you should know what your initial plan is when you're placing your units. Anyway.
And then a big part of the game too is is how you deploy and when you deploy. Do you drop everything?
Correct.
Do you know what you're doing?
There's so many games when I've gone back and looked at mine. I said when I review the game, I'm like I lost this in the deployment because this unit's way out of.
But so
where it
you
needs to be.
should have a strategy. If you're castling up in the corner with dwarves, then it's all about targets.
Yep.
Selection. So,
And what is the opponent? And do your and that's this point. Do your thinking in your opponent's turn. As you see your opponent's moving and doing his stuff, especially when he's sitting there trying to figure out what he's doing for spells, that's your time to try to plan your turn for the next turn and get that head start.
Particularly in the early turns when there's not usually a lot happening as far as units running away and
Right.
you have the occasional shooting or whatever. It can be a little harder when you get battle lines stuck in combat and all of a sudden somebody disappears and it's facing the wrong way.
Right.
But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but at least
there's the rest of the table that's not impacted, so there's always something you can
Right.
think of. So you should be thinking about what you're trying to.
there may be certain things you have to rethink once if
Exactly.
he does something or something weird happens.
Right.
From
Spell
that
zaps
to
you didn't
whatever.
expect, or
Right.
whatever. You lose a combat you thought you were going to win.
What is that noise I keep hearing?
Telephone.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
You sure it's not like the Chi-Hammer ambulance or anything?
It is exactly like it. It's
Okay.
like random people calling it the
Pretty
most
good.
inappropriate times.
All right. Tip 6 was monitor and flag if necessary. This is once the turn TO comes around and announces how much time is left in the turn or whatever, or the round. That's your chance when the TO comes around and makes this announcement. First thing, acknowledge the TO that comes around and makes the announcement.
Yeah.
Acknowledge him, say thanks, whatever. Okay, great, whatever. This is also your time to say, hey, we're kind of running behind here, whatever.
Yep. Have a conversation with your opponent. Where are we?
Let's step this up because, whatever. That's the TO coming around is a good catalyst for having that conversation. A lot of people don't feel comfortable telling your opponent, hey, look, you've got to speed things up.
Right.
But with the TO coming around saying there's only an hour left, you can look at your opponent and say, hey, we're only on turn 3. We've really got to step this up.
Yep.
And, in most cases, as long as you use, it's better to use we need to step this up rather than
Yes.
you need to step this up, even though you mean he needs to step it up.
And you can bring the TO into the conversation as far
If
as
necessary, correct.
in a polite way. It's like, we're on turn. You can tell you got an hour left.
Yeah.
Oh, we're on the
Or,
midpoint of turn 3.
right. Or, hey, we might be in trouble. We're only on the midpoint of turn 3. And then the TO at that point needs to, what's going on here?
Right.
He needs to be aware to start keeping an eye on that game
Yep.
and see what's going Anyway.
Did we miss something?
No, that was it. But what are you thinking?
Rolling all your dice together.
Rolling your dice together?
Okay, let's add that one.
Okay.
The challenge, why it's important to have a lot of dice is...
Oh, correct. You're not picking up and re-rolling.
You're not picking up and re-rolling, because if you have like
Agreed.
6 dice and you need 18, you got to roll it 3 times.
Right.
And then you have to, and I'm guilty of this, you have to clearly announce what you're doing.
Yes.
So are you rolling all your hits first and then you're rolling your wounds, or are you rolling your hits from the first group and then your wounds, or what's going on? But if you're doing it iteratively, 1, it takes longer, and 2, your opponent can get confused and then thinks you're doing one thing that you're not, and you're doing something else. So it is. So, and you just group your
communication.
Dice. It's communication. It's like, okay, I got 10. They all need 3s. Roll them all together. You don't need to roll. Maybe you have a champion in there who has a special. Well, maybe not a good example. A monster that has a special attack.
Right.
They roll a different color die for that one hit, so you don't have to roll it separately. Or you're going to direct 2 attacks against a champion, and the rest of them are against a unit. Right. You can take 2 dice that are 1 color against a champion, and all the rest against a unit.
Yeah, ideally, that's the way you do it. Correct. And also, like you just mentioned, is be very clear to your opponent what this is not in his article, because this is not what he's talking about. But in addition to all this, be very clear to your opponent what you're doing, and things will go much smoother.
Yes.
Throw your dice, roll your dice. So I'm rolling to hit. I need 3s, and you roll your dice down, and then my preferred way of doing it at that point, it's like, okay, I need 3s, and then you pick up your 1s and 2s, leaving all the ones that were successful on the table.
Right.
Give your opponent a chance to acknowledge that that's a valid,
Because sometimes when you're rolling dice too, you don't see it. You don't see that you missed a 2 or
it's
3
easy to
or
miss
whatever.
a die or something.
Yeah, especially when you're rolling like 30 dice.
Yeah, when you got a big unit and you're rolling a ton of dice. And that way your opponent can, look down, oh yeah, there's one over there, thank you. And you pick it up.
Right.
But at least it lets him confirm it, and he's like, oh no. Rather than you just reaching down, grabbing them, and re-rolling the ones, and all of a sudden he's like, well, there was 2 3s in there. Those didn't hit me.
Right.
And you're like, no, there wasn't. But anyway. So take the time to let your... And this is kind of counterintuitive to what he's saying, to speeding up a game, but you've got to take the time to let your opponent validate your die rolls.
Well, it does, because if your opponent's confused, they're going to stop and counter
there's
what
going
you're
to be
doing,
an argument
whatever,
and whatever.
You're going to have to explain it to him what you did, and maybe he'll agree with you, but now you have to take time to explain it.
Right.
So...
But anyway, yeah. Explain what you're doing. Explain your die rolls. Make your die rolls. Let him confirm them. Pick them up. Re-roll. And again, announce again. Now I'm rolling to wound.
Right. And back to your mention on the magic, having cards or having markers, it's important. You're casting the spell. Be clear on what your intent. If you have multiple versions of the spell, what your intended version is, or it's assumed it's always going to be the lowest version.
Which I actually like what they actually wrote that into the rules that if you don't announce you're rolling for the higher version, you're rolling the lower version. Unless I do make an exception for this for my opponents, is if they have a version that if the lower version would not be able to affect me because it's not that's out of range.
Right.
Then you just kind of assume they're doing the one that is in range.
Correct. And there's a couple of cases, I think
there's not a lot of those,
where it's actually the same roll for 2 different effects.
There are. Yeah. There's like the
cosmology is a good example that you have to be clear that you're doing
the
chaos or
the other one.
Yeah,
it's not a huge deal, but you should announce as well. I'm with the random movement spell from Witchcraft. I'm going to give you 2d8. I mean, whatever 2d6 of movement, not 3d6.
Correct.
Those type of things.
Because you have a choice. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't really affect the die roll.
Right.
But
And then back to what you said before, having a marker marking the units that are affected, so people can. Remember what's going on in some capacity is
correct
is very helpful.
And if we're going to talk pet peeves during a tournament, I'm casting divination. I cast this spell. It goes off, whatever it was, stars align, whatever. Immediately mark the unit with the attribute that you give the attribute to.
Right.
Instead of waiting until I cast 3 spells. Here's my 3 attributes.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
Which is. Okay, yeah, but you didn't know this was going to work, which may have changed.
Well, no, but it's clear you're supposed to do everything with that.
And you're very quick.
Before you move to the next one.
Correct.
So, but people, you forget you're moving along. Yes. Things do happen.
And it's also it takes away from your opponent any hint that you're trying to deceive them in some way or trying to get
or
some
take advantage. Exactly.
Because I've also seen which is not a valid thing, but I've seen people do I'm going to roll to march. These 3 units are going to try to march. Roll, roll, roll. Okay,
right.
Now they start moving. Like, no.
One at a time. That's actually that's a real big one. I've seen yes. A lot of people do that.
Correct. Like, no, roll, move, roll, move.
Right.
So.
Or I'm going to declare and then roll before I declare the next unit on a charge.
Oh, correct. Roll to see if it makes it. Yeah, that's kind of died out a lot. Yeah. So, but anyway. Like I said, read the article. It's a very good article. They've had some really nice stuff in the Ninth Scroll. It's definitely worth checking it out.
I think another thing, too, is just adding to the article is think about how you build your army.
Think about how you build your army.
Yeah. If you're new to tournaments and you're not, confident that you're going to be able to do all these different things.
That's a good point.
Maybe you want to go magicless, because if you take a piece out of it, because if you have an army that has a lot of units with a lot of movement, with a lot of shooting and a lot of magic, you're actually going to be hard pressed.
Yes.
To get done in time.
Correct.
So you got to think about that, how you build those armies. So you may say, well, I'm gonna take an army that doesn't have. It's going to go magicless the first time, because now at least I don't have to defend against magic. I don't have to think about spells or anything. Or I'm going to take an army that doesn't shoot. So. Yes. That does, or I'm going to take an army that, like ogres, that only has a few blocks generally, or whatever the case may be. I'm not going to start my first tournament with MSU. So,
yeah, and that's I guess that goes into the other thing. Know what you're capable of. If you are a slower player, maybe start adopting some of that.
Right.
Try to take one of the phases out. Try to take a low shooting army.
Yep.
Try to take a low magic army until you can pick up that speed and pace, and then work in the others.
I think the other thing too is until you play in a tournament, you just don't know how it is.
Right.
Because people a lot of gamers are introverted by nature, and all of a sudden you're in this room with all these people you don't know. You're probably going to be slower, a little more unsure, a little uncomfortable at first.
Right.
So do things to make things. A lot of these things just help make things easier for you.
And the other thing, just to warn you when you go into a tournament, is a lot of times you're going to run up against armies that don't play in your local meta, your local group. So all of a sudden the guy comes up with Vermin Swarm. Oh, none of my friends have Vermin Swarm. I've never played against this.
Yeah.
What does this do? What does this do? What does this do? What is this? It's going to slow things down.
Yeah. And that's back to, if you're going to take an army, the WYSIWYG is very important.
Yes.
At least to a reasonable level. Don't bring units that all kind of look the same and say they're like
this one's this one's that.
4 different things.
Right.
That can be frustrating for your opponent too, as far as they're not sure what's going on. And,
yes.
And they might have to keep asking you what this is and what that is.
Yeah, I played a game recently and got confused because my opponent was using bloat flies, the old bloat fly models for what is the heavy cav in that army? Anyway, the Karkadans or whatever.
The Karkadans, yeah.
He was using them for those, and it threw me because a couple turns I was convinced they were going to fly, and I couldn't chaff them.
Yep.
And it just, that's a WYSIWYG thing.
Yep.
It's got wings.
Yes.
If it's got wings, I'm going to think it can fly.
Yeah. Anyway. I've seen people have 3 of the same unit, but 2 of them have spears and 1 of them has hand weapon and shield.
Right.
And it's like, and you get I thought those guys had spears. So, oops,
Yeah, I've had that question asked to me on the forums and things before. It's like, why don't you run your ferals with spears? It's like, oh, I don't have any models of ferals with spears.
Yeah.
I'm like, so?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess. I mean, it would be simple. I could just take spears and prop them up on the guy's shoulders.
Yep.
Glue them to the base or whatever. But anyway.
I can give you a pack of them if you want them.
Nah, I've got plenty. I've got a billion spears.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are just things to beyond his speeding things up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that does help speed things up a little bit if the opponent's not constantly asking you what that is and what this is, and oh, that was this. Oh, I need to readjust because of that. And anyway,
I said, and then the last one is having some kind of simple transport. That's an obvious one, but simple transport device, which is usually a display tray, but something you can move from game board to game board with your army, and
At a decent speed.
Yeah, don't bring your soft pack with individual models and try to do that after every game. So,
yes, and I guess
or beginning of every game. That's when it's a problem. You're still pulling your guys out, in an hour and a half's gone by.
And there's another thing I will say regarding that is when your game's over, put your army back together.
Right.
If it's going to make you 10 minutes late for lunch, you're going to be 10 minutes late for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
But put your army back together, because there's nothing worse than coming back from a lunch break in a tournament and you walk to your table that you've been assigned, and there's a guy at your table with his army spread out all over his table, your table, slowly picking up his army and putting it back together, while it's costing you time.
And that's
to
well, there's 2 points. One is they could be your opponents, so they're starting the game slow, or they can be I think you're referring to the person who played on the last game.
The guy who played the game there last. His army's still there, spread out all over the place.
So you can't get going. So
correct. So me and my opponent are just sitting there.
Yeah.
If that does happen, my suggestion, which I try to do all the time, is get my opponent over to a spot off to the side and say, okay, let's go over our list.
Yep.
Get that part done while you don't have access to the table.
Yep. Or if it's so crazy,
you can call a TO.
You can call TO and say, can we play the other table?
Right.
Unless it's a nasty table.
You haven't played in my terms. We don't have nasty tables.
Yeah, but sometimes, it's
yeah, I'm just kidding.
the level you play, or sometimes you'll see people do like crazy things with tables.
Yes. So
yeah.
I mean, the main point is Ninth Scroll, fantastic resource.
Yeah.
Definitely read it. Look through it when you get a chance.
Yeah, and a lot of it's hobby related, background related. But every so often you have articles like this, which are, if you're somebody who does all this stuff all the time, maybe not as important to you, but if you only do it occasionally, it's always nice to remind yourself.
Yep, I agree.
Because few people, unless you're being that guy that slow plays, few people don't want to not finish a game.
Right.
And quite often, if you cause me not to finish the game, it can be very frustrating, because that may make the difference that they win or lose.
A lot of times it's on the army you play too. I mean, it's like if I play the army I've been playing against a gunline army, I have very little shooting.
Right.
I have to slog through his spells and fire, or whatever, get to his lines. So that's going to take 3 or 4 turns.
Yep.
So I need those last 2 turns.
Right.
And, unfortunately, I have played against gamey opponents who realize this.
Yes.
So if they can kind of slow a little bit and cut that last turn out,
that's a difference maybe in winning or losing, or you may leave a lot of points on the table.
Correct.
And if that's not your intention,
if that's not your intention, it's just happening.
Then you need to think about it, because you're potentially cheating your opponent or yourself, because you may be the guy that ran across the table.
You may have the good guy that has to struggle through this.
Yeah.
But the big things, I agree with what he's saying here. Big things, what you see in this picture.
Yep.
Have your flux cards, have your spell cards, different colored dice, because you're going to need them for something. Like you said, I'm going to throw in this red one for the spiders, big venom surge attack. Wound markers, you should have wound markers. I personally don't like dice, simply because dice a lot of times get mixed in with other, they get picked up, they get left behind.
Yeah.
Lots of things can happen with dice. But
if you're going to use dice as wound markers, do not use the same dice as you're rolling.
Definitely not.
Use different size and different look.
And while we're going with that, of course, the new one is Veil token markers.
Yes.
For stored Veil tokens that are sitting in the pot.
Yep.
Need to be clearly marked as well.
Yep.
Rather than having that discussion on the next turn.
Yep.
It's like, oh, I've got 3 Veil tokens stored. No, you only had 2. Right. Oh boy, here we go.
Yep.
And then you have to reverse it and go back to look at the last turn and see what they did. And anyway, it's a mess. So, all right. I think we covered it. What do you think?
Yeah, it's good enough for this time.
All right. All right. Thanks for listening.
Till next time.